Today on Straight Talk Africa, we look at U.S. President Donald Trump's first month in the White House. He recently spoke with Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and South African President Jacob Zuma by telephone. Could this signal how important the Trump administration views U.S.-Africa relations? That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. I am Shaka Ssali.
Hello, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Ayan Bior, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll have a discussion on how important the Trump administration views U.S.-African relations.
And coming up later in our STA inbox, our audience weighs in on today's topic through emails, Facebook comments, and tweets. And we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
With a month under his belt, the new president is trying his best to implement the changes he feels he was elected to do. In the process, the U.S. democratic institutions are being tested. My colleague Paul Cisco has more.
Like beauty, judgments about the new president's first month in office appear to reflect the eye of the beholder. Out of the gate, President Trump has signed a number of executive orders, filled several high-level positions, and continues to speak his mind, in part with frequent tweets, and has rigorously battled the media.
It's all fake news. It's all fake news. The failing New York Times, I just see many, many untruthful things.
For the most part, those who voted for him, earning him the electoral victory and the presidency, are cautiously pleased with his 30-plus days in office. Those that did not are, to varying degrees, more cautious, angry, and fearful. To be sure, our system of checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches of government are being tested. Tensions between them are an inherent part of democracy, just as the freedoms of religion, speech, and assembly, and an independent judiciary are vital elements of a thriving civil society and democracy. The new president has been criticized for some of his statements and tweeted comments on the judiciary, even as he presents a new Supreme Court justice to the Congress for confirmation.
I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political, and it would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right.
The statement refers to a lower court ruling on the president's travel ban and the federal law granting the president's authority to restrict those who enter the United States. Unlike previous new occupants of the White House, President Trump is not receiving the traditional honeymoon from the media.
Should I let him have a little bit more? What do you think, Peter?
Meanwhile, as the new president plows ahead on his agenda for America, he has had little to say about U.S. policy towards Africa. He spoke on the phone and received congratulations from Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari and South African President Jacob Zuma, adding he plans to continue working with them in their shared desire for peace and stability on the continent. Earlier this week, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe said he agrees with the U.S. President's America for America approach, adding that with time, Mugabe believes President Trump might review the sanctions imposed by the U.S. on Zimbabwe in 2003 over alleged human rights violations. The Trump administration plans a thorough review of existing U.S.-African trade and aid practices and programs, possibly resulting in modifications and some culling of current agreements. And some analysts say President Trump sees most African nations and many of its leaders as inherently corrupt and squanderers of foreign aid, suggesting a scaling back of existing pro-Africa trade agreements and a reduction in U.S. development resources for sub-Saharan Africa. Paul Cisco, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Joining us here in our Washington studios are three distinguished guests. Angela Kwemo, founder and chair of Believe in Africa. For 7 years, she worked in the U.S. Congress as a legislative counsel for two members of the House of Representatives. She's also the author of Against All Odds, How to Stay on Top of the game. Dr. J. Peter Palm, Vice President for Research and Regional Initiatives, Atlantic Council, and Director, Africa Center. And last but not least, Emira Woods, Associate Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. Well, Angela, Peter, and of course, Emira, I have to say I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the three of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you.
You're most welcome.
It's an honor to be here.
You're most welcome, and especially you. It's the first time that, in fact, we are having the opportunity to host you on Straight Talk Africa for the first time.
Thank you very much, Shaka, and I'm feeling very honored to be joining Emira and Peter. They are very respected thinkers in Washington, D.C.
You're most welcome again. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. Let me come to you immediately, Angela. It's, in fact, it's about 1 month and probably 1 day since the new president occupied 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. Your reaction?
My reaction is with a lot of curiosity and excitement. But keep in mind that Africa policy are not really partisan. So we just hope that he will be quickly educated on the African issues, and that he will just take the issue of the forefront immediately or as soon as possible, and not be distracted or completely derailed by the domestic debates. So the only handicap we have, we Africanists, is the fact that sometimes we get consumed by internal politics while the continent is waiting. So I hope that it's not going to be a distraction.
Well, what about you, Peter? We're looking at a man who wants to make America great again. Your reaction after 1 month in the White House?
Well, first, thanks for having me back, Shaka. I don't think there is a contradiction between making America great again and continuing America's tradition of a bipartisan tradition of a strong partnership with Africa. In fact, I would make the argument that as part of making America great again, Africa's dynamism plays a role in this, and it can be a very important contribution to President Trump's agenda of creating jobs and building prosperity. A lot of people focus on what the president said about America first, but they forget that in the same inaugural address a month ago, he also said that his principle was America first, but he also said we will seek friendship and goodwill with the nations of the world, but do so with the understanding that every nation has a right to seek its own interests. And that includes the 54 states in Africa to seek their own interests, and where those interests and those of the United States complement each other, there we have a basis for a very strong new partnership, reinvigorated.
Any particular reason why some pundits and indeed some foreign governments, in fact, are saying or interpreting America great again, America first, as a sort of euphemism for isolation? Well,
they can take it for what they are, but we live in a world for which concern for oneself cannot be done in isolation. There's enlightened self-interest, and that's what I was pointing out to, and the president was very clear about it in his inaugural address. Yes, his first responsibility is to the American people who elected him, but that also includes their security, and that means strong partnerships, their prosperity, which includes dealing with others on economic and commercial, creating opportunities. So I think there's a lot of win-win for both sides in this, that America can be made great again, and then at the same time helping Africa achieve its full potential as well.
Emira Woods, a win-win situation here. You and a lot of other people used to complain, by the way, that during the campaign, Africa, for example, did not seem to appear on the radar. The new president has apparently spoken not only with the two African presidents, we're talking about Nigerian President, of course, Muhammadu Buhari, and South African President Jacob Zuma, but we also forget that Egypt is also part of Africa.
Well, Shaka, again, thank you for having us on and for this timely discussion. I guess I would have to say win-win. No, not quite. I think there's a lot of losing that we're concerned about. And I think the first came, not long after the inauguration address in the form of these executive orders. And so let's recognize that of the 7 countries that were spotlighted in the executive orders, in sort of this ban from majority Muslim countries, there were 3 that were African, right? So, Libya, it's Sudan, it's also Somalia. And 2 of those 3 countries had U.S. military engagement, at least 2, we can say, probably all, but at least 2 of those countries had direct U.S. military engagement that led to the tremendous both political and economic chaos in both Libya and Somalia today that I think has actually pushed migrants into shaky boats and trying to find a better way of life without recognizing the U.S. involvement and what that has created. So I think we've got to look beyond the words, look at the actions, and there's still a lot more to see, but the actions in this first month, quite frankly, worry many who are concerned that it is reinforcing a fear of the other, particularly feeding into extremist ideology that says, oh yes, the U.S. is anti-Muslim. And so I think we've got to set the alarms now, one day after the first month, right? To say that this is entirely the wrong direction for a country that has played such a critical leadership role in the world.
You talked about the executive order, of course, and mentioned about the 3 African countries that have been affected. The last time I checked, really, back in 2001, I believe that the terrorists, in fact, who attacked the United States, the majority came from Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely.
You also have the number 2 at the time from Egypt and what have you. Any particular reason why Saudi Arabia and Egypt, for example, are not on the list?
Well, many say because those are the friends, the countries that are seen as closest allies of the United States historically. And again, this is both Republican and Democratic administrations that has privileged those relationships and sort of, look beyond whether it's human rights violations or other issues to continue to maintain those relationships. So when you look at Saudi Arabia, clearly all the issues on women and women's rights and women not being able to drive and some of these concerns that have been, expressed for years have been overlooked by an administration intent on maintaining that relationship because of the relationship that many of the countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt, have maintained with Israel, quite frankly.
I see. Well, you seem to be...
it's one thing to be vigilant. It's one thing to, raise an alarm when it's justified. But I think there's a bit of alarm. I'm sure my sister Amira has ever been to Somalia or Libya. But if you've seen, there is no U.S. embassy in Mogadishu.
But what you do have, what you have had is consistent U.S. presence, both U.S. military officers,
but you don't have, you do not have an embassy. You do not have an embassy.
So how do you U.S. private military contractors, right?
Fine, and they're there for legitimate reasons. But you do not have an open embassy from which one could have consular officers who could properly vet people for visas. I think that's what's missed in this.
But many say why, and we have to turn back the clock back to really 2006, 2007, when the U.S. decided to use
let's not argue about past history. Today, I think you have to look at what the fact is. There is no U.S. embassy physically present. There's a small office at the airport that the ambassador uses when he comes to Mogadishu. There's not a functional embassy that could perform the normal vetting, much less extreme vetting, if you will, that can be done there. Libya is a failed state.
So what about, for example, green card holders? What about, frankly, those people that were legally supposed to be in America, including, in fact, some who happen to hold dual citizenship, but happen to have been born in one of those 3 countries?
And the green card holders have been clarified in the subsequent orders and the policy that was signed by Secretary Kelly, Department of Homeland Security. That issue has been clarified. Now, I'm not here. I don't speak for the White House. So I'm not here to defend the executive orders. I'm just saying there are other reasons that justify a little bit of allowing some deference to executives. I don't have access to the information that the chief executive has, but I do know enough. I've been recently to both Sudan and Somalia, and there are questions, I think legitimate ones.
Very interesting. In fact, I saw a caption where U.S. ambassador to Somalia was actually welcoming the new Somali president, Farmajo, in Mogadishu.
Yes.
Interesting. Now we'll pause for a short break. We want to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now streaming on Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa and watch our show live. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA Trump Africa. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that, inspiration to come to work.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Ewart, and this is, of course, Straight Talk Africa, coming to you live from Washington. Let me ask you this question, Angela. I read your book, thank you so much, Against All Odds, How to Stay on Top of the Game. In that particular book, you quote the late Congressman Donald Payne. Don't ever forget where you are coming from. The continent suffers so many challenges. Never stop advocating for the people, no matter what.
Yeah.
Your reaction?
Yes, that conversation, I had a conversation with the late Congressman Payne the day before he died.
Really?
Yeah, gave me a phone call, and maybe 2 days before, just to check on him, and then instead of telling me how he's feeling, he just gave me instruction, and you should do this, you should do that. I was not, and I will never forget that statement. That's why I found the belief in Africa. I continue to advocate. I'm doing other businesses, but I continue to be the voice of Africa and continue to promote the African private sector, human rights, women empowerment, and youth issues. But coming back to the Trump thing, I have to jump on the conversation because let's not be romantic here. When President Trump said America first, it's America first. It has always been. America is having the foreign policy agenda to implement their own interests. So it's nothing wrong about that. Maybe because of his style, he becomes more apparent that he's making the statement is America first. But it's normal for him. He's talking to his constituent. He has to be America first. Creating jobs in America has always been like that, number one. Number two, what does America first means when it comes to Africa? Does it mean America needs to be the first partner to the continent? In that case, I would say, okay, America needs to wake up because there's a very strong competition on the ground with other countries. And the African leaders now are promoting South-South relationship. Of course, China is heavily investing in the continent. India in Japan, even Turkey is playing a big role now. So the challenge for America to become first and be a stronger partner with Africa is to respond to African needs. And then keep in mind that it has been recognized by everybody. We all agree here that Africa is of strategic interest. Even Congress passed 2 resolutions in that regard, strategically, economically, and politically. For security reasons, even the way we are addressing he's engaging in fighting Muslim Islamic extremism will affect the continent because you have almost 43% of our population are Muslim. And you have issues in Nigeria, issues in Libya, and all this. Even the immigration policies are vexing us because it's sending a strong mixed signal to the African partners. And I suspect that one of the reasons why he made that call to Buhari at that time is because he's had that Buhari is Muslim. Boko Haram, Nigeria is the biggest democracy, it's the largest Muslim population.
He's also fighting, by the way, against corruption.
Absolutely, and his conversation with him was about security. He didn't talk about trade, even though we all know that it's a large economy. And of course, South Africa, because the 500 companies up there, and it's not very controversial, even though Zuma is on his way out. And
he talks about security and keeping peace on the continent. You can't just do that on the basis of security. Yeah,
that means for me, peace and democracy is linked to the people. We need to have a people-centered policy. We need to give dignity to those people because it's heaven for recruitment for tourism. Even these bans that we're debating about, it's not just on the merits. No, it's a good idea to scrutinize who we're receiving in America, but it's how you do it. How do you do it in a comprehensive way and make sure you don't create panic or you don't frustrate and disenfranchise certain population? And that's where he made a big mistake. I think it's maybe his style. So, and then the last thing is, we need to continue to be strong. It has no choice. America has no choice. You have two things. You either do it or either leave the continent in the hands of China, who's our biggest control. So it's not, for me, it's not a privilege for America to engage with Africa. It's a must for their own benefit because Africa now have options.
When you talk about people-centered policies, what exactly do you mean? Okay,
there's some speculation that he probably going to cut the budget, cut aid, foreign assistance. So some people are a little bit concerned about that. But I think people are concerned about that are people are benefiting from that, what I would call industry, the humanitarian industry. A bunch of money is spent. To me, we need to reform foreign assistance. We need to make it more effective, cut the red tape, and have it delivering directly to the people. You have some good examples. You have the MCC, who's a country-led program. You have
accountability.
Accountability is a big thing as well. You have the African Development Foundation, who has a people-centered program, African-led program, and they're disbursing the funding directly as a direct grant to the underserved community on the ground. So that's why even when you talk about partnership, mutually beneficial partnership, the new scheme today is all about inclusive growth. Public-private partnership, okay, fine, but where are the people in there? When you have a big companies, Fortune 500 companies, getting into a big contract with the African government and then some big other companies there, does it trickle down to the people? Is this really elevating poverty or creating prosperity among the SMEs, and even the communities? Or is it trickle down blood? So those are parameters that you need to take into consideration when you frame our policy, the way you engage, when you define our trade relationship, even the policy like AGOA, how does it affect SMEs? Is it creating jobs on the ground? How many women, youth are exporting under AGOA? How do we strengthen it? But at the end of the day, we need to give dignity. In the last speech of President Obama at AU, there's one thing I remember about the whole speech. He mentioned dignity 4 times. And for me...
What did you understand by that?
That means Africa needs to be responsible. They need to define their own agenda. They need to have African-centered. African holds the key to its own development. Development is not going to come from the U.S. Even now that President Trump is talking about America first, it's time for Africans to wake up and think about Africa first as well. What goes for me? Let me give you an example. Ethiopia. You talk about AGOA. It's been 15 years we implementing AGOA with some success and some failure. But the countries that are really benefiting from AGOA are the countries that have AGOA strategy. Like Kenya, they're building a micro-manufacturing industry there for food, food process, because they have a strategy.
South Africa?
South Africa.
Lesotho,
Mauritius. The countries that are not really benefiting from AGOA, the country has no strategy. They come for conferences, we have discussed, but even if you look at the way they're spending the money, it's good to expect the U.S. to give technical assistance because America has the know-how, they have the technology. But in reality, as an African, I believe 75% of the chance of Africans to really thrive depends on Africans themselves.
Very interesting. Peter, Angela is talking about AGOA. And I happen to come from a country which probably more than any other country on the continent really promoted the idea of AGOA, promoted the passage of AGOA and what have you, and that is Uganda, and obviously it does not have anything to show for it. Now, it is interesting that there are two important African leaders. We are talking about Zimbabwean President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and we are talking about Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. They have reacted very positively to the Trump presidency. You saw a clip where Mugabe is saying, among other things, he likes the idea of America for America approach. What are these two individuals reading in this?
Well, I think there's a bit of trying to curry favor, and you know, who knows what President Mugabe is thinking at any one moment if he is forming thoughts. He's turning 93 and shows no apparent willingness to give up power or.
He's 93 already.
Yes, and give up power or respect the will of the people should otherwise. But I think more importantly, to return, I think Angel made a very good point that Africa has its potential within itself, that it cannot rely on outside programs, even signature programs. Now, we've had a strong bipartisan tradition in this country. AGOA came into place with a bipartisan effort under President Clinton. President Bush earned a lot of applause for PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief, which has kept millions of Africans alive with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. But at the end of the day, it's Africa itself. President Obama's signature Power Africa, which was supposed to generate 30,000 megawatts of power. Years later, it's maybe 4,000 megawatts.
Yeah, maybe
Ethiopia's dams, which it's building, renewable energies, are which were in the works long before Power Africa was a twinkle in anyone's eye, is exporting power to its neighbors and providing power there. Morocco, which just rejoined the African Union, is on course by the end of this decade to have half of its energy coming from renewables, sustainable renewables, and it's exporting technology. The agricultural revolution taking place in Africa today with partnerships for fertilizer, taking things from the country, nitrates, phosphates, and creating fertilizer for. All this is happening in Africa. Now, there is a role for the United States in this. It's the role to help the technical expertise. There are some of Africa's deficits, infrastructure, power, and others. American companies can take part in this, provide the technical assistance, and do well for themselves. And even AGOA, although it's created millions of African jobs, it's created a small, modest number, maybe 120,000 jobs here in the United States. So it's create jobs here. And so we have to look at the next iteration. AGOA has another 8 years or so to run, but the next iteration has to be more than just a one-way unilateral concession. It has to be a true partnership. McKinsey recently had a study which says that the African consumer market of businesses and individuals by 2025, less than a decade away, is going to be worth $5.6 trillion.
Very interesting.
And that's a market that American businesses, as part of the growth that President Trump wants to encourage here, American businesses should take part in that. And we should use things like the Exim Bank to help open that market to American commerce.
Very interesting, Peter. By the way, it should be noted that Morocco did not rejoin the African Union because the last time I checked, it actually left an organization that was called the Organization of African Unity in 1984. And 2002 was the birth of African Union. So it's actually the first time it joins the successor of the OAU.
The successor organization, which continues on, so we can...
That is correct. Emina, what about you? What about, we talk about Africa. Africa should take care of itself, and indeed it should, because, let's face it, when you think about resources, natural, human, and everything, this is perhaps the richest continent on this planet Earth, and yet the poorest people on Earth.
Without a doubt, Shaka, I think you are right to say that this is the richest continent. When you think about whether it's gold or diamonds or oil or uranium, right?
Yes.
The resources of this global economy are dependent on Africa. And I think what you see again, it is not only this administration, it is Democrats and Republicans, is that 80 to 90% of U.S. engagement with the continent of Africa is in oil, liquefied natural gas, and mining. It's in the extractive industries. So the U.S. has always been first, some of us say, since the days of the slave trade, in extracting the resources of Africa. Then it was human resources. Now it is natural resources. But it is the extraction really for the purpose of taking out the raw resource, taking it elsewhere to have value added, and then shipping it back to those very consumers in Africa. The model has to be challenged, because unless those resources have value that is added in Africa, unless the manufacturing, as my colleagues have mentioned already, the importance of manufacturing, unless the manufacturing takes place in Africa where there can be jobs with decent pays, and there are areas outside the extractive industries like renewables that do not continue the disastrous climate change, where Africa is at the very epicenter of the chaos of rising sea levels, right? So, unless we challenge the model, we will continue to have the extraction happen, and external, particularly multinational corporations and local elites that do their bidding, and also government officials that may be doing their bidding, a very narrow, less than 1% of the population actually benefiting from the very resources on the land on which they live.
Unfortunately, media time is not our best ally, but next time, of course, we'll talk about the possibility, frankly, or the need of a paradigm shift, and probably about a leadership deficit, or where is the leadership, frankly, to add the value that you are talking about. Because ever since I was a kid, I was always told that Africa consumes what it does not produce and produces what it does not consume. Nothing has changed. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment, including your comments and thoughts, our social media segment, so don't go away.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them, today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Up Front every Wednesday, 1730 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number is 202-619-3111, and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to turn down the volume on your radio or television and keep your comments brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gidhi-Ewart, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. It's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Ayen. Take it away, Ayen.
Thanks, Shaka. We received tremendous feedback in our STA inbox to this week's question. U.S. President Donald Trump made his first phone calls to African heads of state, speaking with Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and South African President Jacob Zuma. This leads us to our question of the week, which asks, what are your expectations from U.S. President Donald Trump towards Africa? Before we read your responses, I'd like to thank all of you for using our social media platform to communicate with us. And another reminder that we are tweeting live today. Use the hashtag #VoaTrumpAfrica. And if you haven't yet, please follow us at VOA Shaka. And speaking of, let's go to a tweet from Kasika, who tweets, "We Africans should not rely much on America. I expect nothing new." And we have another tweet from Shalom L, who tweets, "At POTUS expectation, build Africa. Hashtag American community first." Of course, POTUS is not only the acronym for President of the United States, it is also Trump's presidential Twitter handle. And our last tweet is from Anuke Christian, who tweets, "To be candid, Trump has nothing to offer Africa. It will be wishful to expect good things from Trump for Africa. And now to our comment of the week from Facebook fan Mohammed Ahmed Mansour in Monrovia, Liberia, who writes, I'm of the conviction that U.S. President Donald Trump is going to be intolerant and disinterested in issues pertaining to domestic politics of African countries. African leaders will have to be careful about how they manage their relationship with the United States. I believe Africa is likely to slide down the list of foreign policy priorities for President Trump. President Trump is not going to be open to lobbying by the African diaspora in America, which has historically played an important role in pushing Africa's domestic policy. Now let's go to another comment from a Facebook fan, Osito Charles, who writes, I don't have any expectations from President Donald Trump, nothing at all. If I can't expect anything from my own leaders, how can we expect anything from Donald Trump? And our last Facebook comment comes from Vincent Otuma, who writes, only Africans can deal with their own problems. If Africa waits for White House help, she will wait for eternity. President Trump made it clear in his inauguration speech that it's going to be America first. And of course, that America First policy was not just in the inauguration address, it was also his core message during his campaign. Shaka, your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, of course, for sharing that with us. What about you, Emira? I come to you specifically because the last time, frankly, we interacted, it was a very brief time.
Yes. So, I think we have to say, your viewers, as always, with Straight Talk Africa, have their finger on the pulse of a lot that's going on. I think the skepticism was very clear in all of the social media comments and the Facebook particularly. So, yeah, I think there's still a lot to be seen. This administration is just getting started. You have key officials not yet even in place. So we will have to wait and see what comes out of them. But I think we clearly are seeing some signs on the wall that Africa, particularly the African Union, as your viewers have said in social media, the African Union has to take the lead in putting the priorities of Africa first, right? That we've got to use the opportunity to put in place what is already clear, an agenda for the next 50 years for the continent that focuses on young people, that focuses on technology, that focuses on the values of particularly what we have within to build our economies from within. I think it is an opportunity for the leadership that is needed from the continent to kind of show its strength now.
Talking about an opportunity from the continent, I also have an opportunity to thank Ayen for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
And that does it for today's social media segment. Just a reminder that we appreciate all the feedback, whether it's in social media form or using other means to communicate with us. Please keep them coming. And if you're a new fan, drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com, or post your comment on our Facebook page. Enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa, and be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Sign up to VOA TV2 Africa, and follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. A reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday on Facebook and on our website. Go to VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page, or simply watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll discuss the latest political developments in Somalia as the country moves forward under the leadership of newly elected President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. That's right here on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back, and our discussion today is how important the Trump administration views the U.S.-Africa relations. And our distinguished guests are Angela Cuomo, founder and chair Believe in Africa, and for several years she worked in the U.S. Congress as a legislative counsel for 2 members of the House of Representatives, Dr. J. Peter Palm, Vice President for Research and Regional Initiatives, Atlantic Council, and Director, Africa Center, and Emilia Woods, Associate Fellow, Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C. Well, you know, ladies and gentlemen, of course I have to say that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you on Straight Talk Africa.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Shaka.
Great to be with you and your viewers.
You're most welcome. I always, in fact, like to interact with you, ladies and gentlemen, so feel free to come anytime.
Thank you very much.
What about reaction to the social media, Peter? You seem to be itching to say something.
Well, I think it's unfortunate that the impatience of people to see immediate results perhaps results in some low expectations. Remember, it's only been a month since the president was inaugurated, and as Amira pointed out, the team has yet to be built out, and so we have to wait. But very early this year, people, maybe some of the viewers are not aware, but President Trump has 2 major Africa engagements already on the calendar. May 25th to 27th, he's going to be at the G7 meeting of the major economic powers of the world. This year's theme, which is being, of the summit, which is being hosted in Sicily, is Africa. So it's going to be a major Africa discussion about the developed world's policies toward Africa. And several weeks ago, in his conversation with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, whose government announced its own Marshall Plan with Africa very recently, President Trump accepted the Chancellor's invitation to personally attend the G20 summit, which will be in Hamburg, July 7th and 8th. And again, that summit this year, very coincidentally, has Africa as a theme. So the president, within the first 6 months of being in office, is going to attend 2 major meetings focused on Africa. So I think he will come up to speed very quickly once the team is built out.
Very interesting. Angela?
Expectation is just expectation. Now, you remember in 2009 when President Obama was elected, we all thought, no, Jesus was coming back to Africa. So it's not, in my view, you shouldn't take into too much consideration about what people are expecting or not expecting. It's all about, as my former boss said, it's all about what you do during this term. How the African diaspora, how the African leaders we engage and we define their own strategy and their own engagement in the U.S. That's about expectation. And number 2, I'm sure in 4 years from now, I hope we'll be pleasantly surprised just because we didn't have expectation. President Obama, we expected a lot from him. He did a lot because he didn't cut the budget. At that time, the economy was really bad. They were cutting the budget. We were in the midst of recession. He maintained PEPFAR. He even increased the Feed the Future program. We pushed the AGOA. He launched 5 years later, he launched Power Africa. It was just $7 billion. It was a little bit ambitious. MCC was maintained. And then the African Women Entrepreneurship Program, the YALI. So I think he did a lot.
Power Africa.
Power Africa was just, $7 billion.
I realize that you were somehow associated with Nigerian multi-billionaire Tony Erumelu. He is supposed to be contributing towards the Power Africa.
Yeah, I think he's partnered with GE and on the Power Africa. But you remember, the Nigerian context is a little bit difficult. It's just not giving technical assistance and technical advisor to structure those deals on the purchase agreement and things on the power sector is not all. You need to do and handle the gas development problem in Nigeria, which is challenging, the gas production, the production, the distribution, and then the transmission. It's 4 different sectors at the same time. You cannot address the power issue only on the distribution, only on the production. It has to be holistic. And I think you know the Nigerian context. For those reasons, the corruption issues and the policy. The land of the Ogas. Yeah, they're facing other challenges that are not necessarily linked to Power Africa itself. But yet, we still need to enhance it. When you talk to some people who were involved with that, they will tell you that there's no money attached to it. We need to promote more the SMEs. You need to address more the grill issues. You need to think about the rural area. And some Africans say you need to get out of just the 7 countries that are targeting the Power Africa and expand it. The Electrify Africa Act expand programs throughout the 48 African countries to help them address their energy poverty. So it's more complicated than that. And then they have foreign currency issue in Nigeria. That's not helping foreign investment in Nigeria. So the current administration, the Trump administration, have to maintain all that and help them on Exim. You need to expedite the process, give more strength to Exim banks so they can allow American companies to export more of the technology, the manufacturing product, including clean technology and renewable energy. So a lot of things that can be done in this administration. I'm sure because he's a business-oriented man, I'm sure he will understand the necessity of strengthening the institutions so they can maintain democracy, because no economy without democracy. I'm sure he will elevate or maintain a high-level discussion of business sector.
Maintain democracy. You need, first of all, democracy before you think about maintaining it.
No, I was saying maintaining engagement.
Oh, okay.
You need to strengthen the institution to enhance democracy.
I see. I see.
Because there's no economy without a democracy. But I'm very curious to know how we engage with certain leaders, especially the strong men.
How can you say there's no economy without democracy? There's certainly not democracy. There's no democracy in China, is there?
There's no democracy in China, but they have an economy. The Chinese were able to define their own economic model, not based on the Western world. They combine the best of both worlds. They control the entire thing. The banking system is controlled by the government. The industry is controlled by the government, and it's trickled down to the people.
But it works.
But it works. So it doesn't. But for Africa, for example, to maintain the stability of the country, the stability of the transaction, security of the legal system, we need to improve the judiciary system so the investor will come and be confident that if they have a problem, they can go to a court. They need to reduce corruption. So corruption, we can talk about corruption for 4 hours. Corruption is not just embezzlement and it's the entire education, entire mindset that need to be changed in Africa and the culture.
And the type, perhaps, as someone once said, that is in fact malignant corruption. Correct? Not benign.
Not benign, because it's a culture. If the civil servants are not educated, if they don't have a salary, they're more inclined to take gift. And they have this culture of gift in Africa, which is not necessarily corruption. And then you have this big thing nobody's talking about, campaign finance. When you are paying somebody at the head of parastatal, his job is to steal the money to fund the party. When you look at the elections conducted in African countries, why it is, but nobody wants to talk about that. Campaign finance is a big issue. And then you have to legislate. I'm not going to say legalize corruption, but create a profession in consulting work or whatever, something that will make people put the money directly on the table instead of putting that under the table. It's a whole industry, but it's a whole culture. And then at the same time, the other thing nobody wants to talk about is also a big issue is transfer of money. When you steal money and you send it to a Swiss bank account, it's twice corruption, twice an issue. But if you steal money, you invest in the country, build a building, the building is not going anywhere. So at least you can see something palpable. So you're not paying tax on it.
The Panama Papers.
Yeah, you're not paying taxes on it, but at least the money is not going anywhere, and the money is circulating. I was talking to a friend of mine in Nigeria yesterday. He was telling me, you know what, Angel, maybe you want corruption back. If you want corruption back, how can you say that? He said people will steal money, but the money will be circulating. They will take care of their family. They will buy gifts to the small business. Will open shops everywhere. They will buy cars. The money is circulating. Right now, the money is not circulating. So I was like, okay, that's the point of view. We need to dig into that. So we can talk for 4 hours. I think people can have PhDs on corruption and see how we can address it, not just on the African side, but also on the international side, because the corruption is two-way stuff.
I think the critical issue here is that you need regulation within an economy. You need to regulate the flow of capital within African economies in particular. And so what we have now is an administration that says they want to get rid of regulation. So what does that mean? Not only for the U.S., but for the world. If you're getting rid of regulation, that means you're going to continue to have capital flight outside of Africa, because the little bit of capital controls were being regulated will now be eliminated in a global economy with the leadership of a U.S. saying, let's get rid of all regulation. I think we've got to look at some of the principles coming out of this administration and what that means for some of the things that Angela is talking about.
Because the last time I checked, this is a country that is run by institutions. Not individuals, really. Not an individual, correct? I think he has to negotiate. I mean, he has to compromise. He has to wheel and deal, correct?
And he said he wants to get rid of wasteful regulations, but there's no one saying eliminate all regulations. What is an executive order about a regulation of a different sort? So let's not exaggerate here. Let's be...
Well, no, I think what we have...
Talking about regulation, personally, let's talk about regulations.
Yeah.
These are not personal views. Regulation on top of regulation make things very complicated sometimes. Forget about in foreign policy, in domestic policy. Look at the time, how many people need to hire to follow, just to respect and to implement regulations. It's a lot of money. So for companies, for example, it costs a lot of money. So I can talk about that now that I'm a private citizen running my business. It will cost you maybe half your budget just on the oversight. So deregulating is not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to know where to start and not.
I think in order to have some of the constraints, particularly on the economy, that will look to developing African infrastructure using taxation, using resources that are coming from the continent to develop the continent, I think we have to look at how we regulate economies in the interests of the continent so that the issues around, as you say, illicit flow of monies outside, whether it's to secret tax havens or where have you, right, foreign bank accounts, that some of those efforts are curtailed. It is regulation that will be able to do that. But again, in spite of the fact that we have the edicts coming from the White House, we also have a clear sense that regulating the economy, whether it's the U.S. or globally, is not something that this administration is interested in. The other issue that I think has been pushed quite clearly is privatization. And what does that mean not only for the U.S., where education, is now being headed by someone who wants to privatize education, get away from public schools, what that means for the U.S., but also for the globe. Particularly Africa, where public schools, where how many of us gained our education on the continent, right? And to have public schools now privatized through not only an effort coming from the U.S., but emanating from the U.S. elsewhere in the globe, a push for privatization of education. What does this mean for future generation? I think these are the policies we have to begin to critically examine as the Trump administration takes hold.
Emina and Peter, unfortunately, frankly, I have to go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers from the continent. They would like to weigh in. Good evening, Martin from Uganda. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa. Hello? Martin? I'm afraid I cannot hear Martin. You could weigh in?
I would just weigh on the education. It's very fine when you're sitting in Washington to have your ideological preferences, but when you're talking about education in Africa, why is it that if private schools were so many parents sacrifice everything they have, whatever they have, to send those children because they want their children to have an opportunity? So I'm not saying we abandon the public schools, but there's a reason why their parents, and to take away those options for an ideology of maintaining public schools, whether it be here or abroad, I think is a mistake. I think the choice belongs to the parents.
We have to push back on that, right? Because essentially you're getting rid of choice for parents. I just came back from Liberia, of course, which is home to me. And what you see in Liberia is that the public schools are being completely dismantled, handed over to really an American private company that's interested in seeking its own profits and the profits of its shareholders. They are getting school buildings. So schools are closing. The public schools are closing. Children are having to then walk 5, 10, who knows how many miles to get to a school because they cannot afford to go to the private school, and the public school has closed. So it's looking at a very real way, not from Washington, but from the ground. What is the impact when you say education is free and compulsory and it is no longer available to kids whose parents can't afford it?
Liberia is a constitutional democracy. We have an elected president and elected government. So we have also in a White House, right, a push towards a model of development that says you privatize education in the U.S. and around the globe. Liberia's elected leaders are already deciding this long before Donald Trump was elected. This is not just one country. This is multiple countries that are now engaging in a push to get rid of public school education, to shut out opportunities for children now and into the future. So it is not just one country. It is, yes, it will impact the U.S., but it will impact countries all around the globe.
So
My point is that it is policy
implemented by this White House that will have detrimental effects on Africa that we have to begin to be very consistent in analyzing and
it seems to me that we're talking really about a need for the type of leadership, frankly, that probably does not exist. Do you really, I mean, you can't think about, for example, outsourcing leadership in order to develop Africa. Africans must develop themselves.
So let's be really clear on this, and let's use history as our model.
In the 60s, our parents came from, I'm not going to say the bush, but quote unquote the bush, from the village, went educated to Europe to become agent of the former colonial power.
Right.
Our generation is completely different. So when they were engaging with the former colonial power, they didn't have any knowledge.
Correct.
You know, you have stories when they go to Paris or go to London or somewhere, and then they will sign documents and all you know. So, but our generation is completely different. We cannot just blame the international community. We were educated there, you were educated here, you understand, you can think like an American, you can think like a Liberian.
Take responsibility.
So now you cannot say you didn't know, you're not informed. So it's our generation now to think about our own system. You know what works for us, what doesn't work for us. Very simple example, I like this little story.
So really about the role perhaps, you know, that should be expected from the diaspora.
That's a big advantage that the diaspora brings when it comes to the continent, because we understand on the business front, for example, it's an international trade front. Cultural understanding is key for any transaction. The diaspora understand the international standard, understand the rules and the regulations here, so they can so you can easily serve as a bridge between the American companies and African companies. And the diaspora, when they go back, you know, let's also be real. Let's not be arrogant thinking that the diaspora will bring the solutions. When we look at the rhetoric, you know, the Africa Rise song that started in 2012, it is not because of the government. It's not because of that segment of the population nobody noticed. The businessmen, nobody paid attention to, because bilateral relations was all about ministers and ministers, president to president. The African private sector was completely ignored. The informal sector was just the street. But you don't know how much money circulated in the informal sector, for example. The middle class was there, but there was no indication. The formula in Washington, D.C., the World Bank didn't really capture them. So when they started rising, the people said, okay, in 1 year, Africa is really rising. It's not because of the government. I'm sorry to tell you that, because the government is more accountable toward the international establishment than toward their own people. But because
they are more accountable toward the so-called development partners.
Development partners.
Not their own people.
Not their own people.
Why?
Because, look at this, the same thing, look at the history. The leaders who came to power in the 16th, by the years of independence, the real nationalists, Kwame Nkrumah, Nyerere, Kutume, Lumumba, they all disappeared. The one that made it to the presidency were all almost like agents.
Yes, my dear, but we have to say, why did they disappear? Why did they disappear?
So, right? They rely on international support. The election in Francophone countries in Central Africa depends on Paris. You have to solve it in Paris before you go back to your people. People are not educated. It's decided 3 months before the election with bags of salt, T-shirts, food, and then you read the election.
20 seconds? 20 seconds?
Yeah, quickly. So they don't think about delivering what they promise to the community because they don't depend on them. This is not democracy. Let's be honest, it's not democracy. We organize election, we already know
who's going to... There is no election. Those are not elections, those are selections.
Why you're election, because they're spending millions of dollars for nothing. If you know this president is going to be re-elected, why are you spending millions of dollars to win an election? You already know he's going to win.
Well, unfortunately, I think time is not our best ally. We'll have to wait for the next, perhaps, edition to discuss a little bit more on that. On that note, thanks to our 3 distinguished guests, Angela Kwemo, Dr. J. Peter Pham, and last but not least, Emira Woods. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next, and tomorrow morning is Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter Africa. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.